By our work, we are changed. Hello, and welcome to this new series, the Anatheion, specifically for beginners to the Western Esoteric Initiatory System that I teach. And in this set of lessons, we are going to be looking at the core foundations of the Western Esoteric Initiatory System, based on both academic work and also practical work as well. And in this first lesson, we're going to be covering correspondences. Correspondences are one of the most important things that we can learn in Western esotericism, but not just as a mental exercise. This is why the Golden Dawn actually folded, not only because the main founders of the Golden Dawn were busy in arguing about their tradition and about the source of their tradition. People like Yeats were publishing papers on should the Golden Dawn remain a magical order and so forth. But whilst that was going on, the evidence of the students, the actual members of the order, was telling a different story. In effect, they were complaining that they were learning information, but there was no practical use. They couldn't understand why they were having to learn Hebrew, for example, or correspondences. And also other members were complaining that they were attending rituals, but they felt empty, that there was nothing in the rituals other than people reading out lots of information. And that is because the founder members were not able at that time, because they were too embroiled in social and political arguments amongst themselves, to remind the students to teach properly the liaison, the connection, the relationship between learning correspondences and actual practice. One is useless without the other, and this is why we're going to start with correspondence, but I'm going to show you a practical exercise as your homework for this particular foundation lesson. If you have any questions, then this is being released in the members only section of the Actual Magician's Bookshelf channel, and I'm more than happy to respond to comments underneath the video. That will be excellent. Thank you. So in one of the public videos, I talked about books on the academic study of Western esotericism, and one of the foundational books I mentioned was Antoine Fèvre's Access to Western Esotericism. This was the very first book that was recommended that I read. In fact, it was mandatory to read for the MA in Western Esotericism at the University of Exeter. And it was mainly because Fèvre identified 4 key components of defining what actual Western esotericism is. Now, you can go and take a look at that video if you like, as additional research and reading as to what those 4 components are. But for now, let's just concentrate on correspondence, symbolic and real correspondences, as being fundamental to Western esotericism. And he immediately makes the connection to as above, so below. Now, in the Western Esoteric Initiatory System that I teach, it's not just as above, so below. It is also as within, so without, as without, so within, and as now, so always, and as always, so now. As above, so below speaks to a spatial relationship in the universe, a hermetic dictum, but it misses an entire other side of actual magic, which is temporal, which is based on our understanding, our appreciation, and our experience of time. And unless you've been a practitioner for many years, you don't really appreciate from the outside how constant ritual, constant magic, constant divination fundamentally alter one's sense of time. If you've watched the film Arrival, based on the book Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, an incredible story and an incredible film, you'll understand somewhat of the nature of the experiential nature of time when it becomes changed within your own experience of it, within your own awareness and your own perception, and magic does do that. So we're going to look at correspondences first to begin to build up a new understanding of the universe, but also a constant ongoing experience. It's something that you are not just going to learn, you are going to apply and begin to start to, in the same way that the character in that film and in the story has her understanding and experience of time changed by learning an alien language, then this is exactly what happens when we learn correspondence. And this is the inner, the esoteric, the occult nature of teachings, because anyone can publish anything on anything, anyone can read anything on anything, but it is only by our work we are changed. And that is the real foundation of Western esoteric initiation work, is the actual experience of it. Otherwise, it is literally a closed book. So the history of occultism is full of correspondence and the application of correspondence. If you want a source book to read and to have as one of the 10 books that I recommend for students and practitioners of Western Esotericism, then it is possibly of no surprise, if you've already done some reading, that the 3 books of occult philosophy by Agrippa, Henry Cornelius Agrippa, are the fairly foundational works. These influenced Francis Barrett, who wrote a book called The Magus, which is quite a lot of a rip-off of Agrippa, and it influenced the Golden Dawn and Crowley and Waite and everybody else that followed. So this is it's part of the Llewellyn Sourcebook series as well. And in this we have 3 sort of books, but we also have all of these tables, and it's the tables that look pretty daunting to begin with, and then we have immediate links to names of spirits and what they have rule over. And this is where the so-called occultists, even the contemporary ones, dive in first, and this is very popular at the moment. All of the Grimoire tradition, the PGM, the papyri, Gnostica, Magica, all of the Coptic spellcraft work and the cunning path and all of this, but they are totally missing. It's like trying to not just run before you can walk, but literally fly before you can even stand up straight or know where you want to go when you start flying. And I think, yeah, this is all very intriguing and very magical and so forth, but let's step it back a little bit, start with some foundations, and then we can work up to this. So, for example, theurgy and the Emerald Tablet and so forth, we begin to understand a lot more quickly once we've learned the basic language and the experience that we then have, having learned this basic language all the way. Let's start right at the beginning and work forwards. And also it's a lot safer, but not in the way that people think. Again, people go on about, I've seen a lot of sensational videos recently of the Abramelin being a forbidden ritual, a ritual that has killed many people and driven people to suicide and things like that, which is all nonsense. But it's actually your mental health that is the first thing that we have to consider and look after in Western esotericism. Over the last 45 years, I have seen more people go off the rails in their just basic psychological mental health than I have seen carried away by demons. And it sounds a bit mundane, obvious, and perhaps even a bit lame to say that, but it's actually harder to look after your mental health than it is to summon demons. So, yeah, let's get our foundations, get our language, and then we can move on with as much of a framework around us as possible. There's still room for epic adventures, weird magical events, all sorts of things. In fact, I dare say, and I propose to you at this point in your studies, that you will have far more of that in the future than people who end up going off the rails because they go straight into summoning Belial and then think that some problem in their relationship is because of that, and then completely derail their entire life, their relationships with their family, their work life, and everything, because they've just gone a bit bonkers. So let's start at the beginning, and I assure you, in my experience at least, and watching students over the coming years, because this is a lifetime work, it is not just for one summoning ritual or a series of them. This is part of a consistent, coherent and comprehensive view of a magical life that I'm proposing to you in this system. And I'm only going to teach you things that I have been taught. I will try and cite my sources for those, and a lot of this is unique stuff. I've not seen it anywhere else because I approach it from a very particular way based on what I've been taught and what I've found works over the last 45 years. So it's a bit pared down to the essentials. So, correspondences then. When we think about correspondences, we immediately think of 777 by Aleister Crowley. We also think of Agrippa and the Magus, the Golden Dawn, and all of the tables, and the Tree of Life, and Hebrew, and astrology, and correspondences actually used a lot, of course, in plant magic and natural magic. A particular herb will correspond to a particular planet, which will correspond to a particular disease, and hence the herb will be seen as a treatment for that disease. And 777 is Aleister Crowley's. Again, he's slightly borrowing from Agrippa and other sources, but again, it's tables, and this is my original version. You can see it's been long consulted and used. But there are other versions, for example, this one, 777, and other Kabbalistic writings. This one is published by Wiser Books. And either version will do, either version, as long as it has all of the main tables inside it. And we can see here that we have, as I mentioned, plants, real and imaginary, animals, precious stones, and then even Hindu legendary demons, selection of Christian gods, some Roman gods. So here, for example, we have Venus on the right there, which corresponds to the number 7, which corresponds to Netzach on the Tree of Life, and over here, the animals that correspond are the lynx, and then the rose, and the precious stone is emerald. So emerald is the precious stone. Whoops, could ring it there. The rose is the the plant, and the lynx is the animal, and they all correspond to Venus. And so each of these Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, and the paths on the Tree of Life, and the Hebrew letters, so a total of 32 correspondences, correspond to something. And then we make a correspondence from one system to another. So it's something, I can't remember what Fev calls that, but there's a particular name for a concordance between different systems. So can you see already how this sort of basic approach allows us to get a framework to begin with of our studies, a framework that we then picture as the tree of life. And so we have 10 things represented as the circles on this form of the diagram, although they're actually called Sephiroth, which means a numerical emanation, not a sphere, but a numerical emanation. And out of those emanations, in their relationship, we imagine that they are split out like this, and they're all one thing in total. And then we have these, what are called paths, but confusingly, these are also called paths. So we have 32 paths made out of 10 Sephiroth emanations and 22 connections between those. And there are different ways of connecting these and different ways of laying out this diagram. But for now, we're going to use the same one as some of these basic foundational books so that we can learn one system first. And again, I don't need to argue about the different layouts, the different systems, the different so-called traditions, because to me, they're all different maps at different times for different purposes, of different ways of taking the journey, but it is always through the same place, and that place is reality as we experience it. So we have these 22 connections, and that's where we're going to start learning our correspondences. What I want you to do is, and I'll put up some documents about this as well so that you can have a reference, but your first exercise, your foundational exercise, if you came to me as a brand new student without knowing anything at all about Western Esotericism, I would say to you, over 45 years, I have learned that correspondence is the most important thing. Correspondence, therefore, should be learnt first and ongoing. We can learn all of the things we're going to cover in this sequence simultaneously, and one thing will connect with another, and you'll see quickly how each thing feeds into another. And then, even if this is the only thing you ever study, it will be consistent, comprehensive, and congruent within itself. It won't set you off on a wrong path, I hope, or disequilibrate you. It is all of a singular piece. And the more you put into it, the more it will spiral up within a controlled boundary as well. That is the intention of this series of videos. So, we have learned about correspondence. We have learned about its place in magic. And I would just add to that, obviously, correspondence is then the foundation of a lot of, not all, but a lot of ritual practice. So if you were going to do a love spell, you would want to invoke Venus. That's one way of doing it. It's a bit overkill, but it would be, if you wanted to attract better relationships or work with relationships in your life, you would work with Venus. You would form a relationship to Venus or Astarte, and then you would use the correspondences. So you would have roses in your life, you would have a picture of a lynx perhaps, or embody the power of the lynx, and you would use correspondences. You would use the number 7, you would make a heptagram, you would write the name of Venus, all sorts of things. You would have perhaps pink or green candles, depending on which correspondence system you used. And so if we wanted to know the colours of the robes that we were going to wear, then we would use 777 and find the table of colour. See if I can find, for example, the King's scale. And when there are 4 scales of colour, but that's intermediate work. So number 7, amber. Okay, so we might use amber candles. I think the very first time I ever did a sort of relationship type spell, I remember using amber oil, essential oil, and putting it on white candles to get a sort of weird correspondence between amber and the candles. So it forms the basis of practical magic as well, but we're going to see a different way of using it through these 10 lessons, a far more real world and practical way of using it. So what I want you to do is you're going to start to become familiar with the Tree of Life, because this is an essential model in a lot of systems, and it certainly is for the Western Esoteric Initiatory System, which I will henceforth call the WEIS, W-E-I-S for an abbreviation, and this is particularly the system as I teach it. So the WEIS, in the WEIS, the Tree of Life is fundamental as it is to many other systems, but in a slightly different manner of use. We're not just going to learn it for the sake of it, and we're not just going to do practice for the sake of practice. We're going to combine the two. So each of these numerical emanations, these circles on the diagram, have a name, and these are the English transliterations of Hebrew names. So Kether, Hokmah, Bina, Hesed, Gibora, Tifreth, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth. Each of these is a Hebrew word that means something in Hebrew. So Kether means crown, Hokmah means wisdom, Bina means understanding, and so forth down the Tree of Life, and Malkuth means kingdom. They mean other things in the same way that the word weather could apply to all sorts of things in English, but we tend to take the main meaning of Yesod as foundation, Tifreth as beauty, and so forth. I'm going to give you a table that not only has these names, but also has their Hebrew spelling, and that is both in the Hebrew characters and the names of the Hebrew letters. Sounds a bit difficult, but it's obvious when you look at it. For example, Kether is actually spelt in Hebrew, Kaf, Tau, Resh. And those are three Hebrew letters that also have their own meanings, which is unlike English, where the letter A doesn't mean anything other than the letter A. But in Hebrew, for example, the letter K, Kaf, means the palm of the hand. The letter Tau means cross or a mark or a signature, that sort of thing. The letter Resh for R, transliterated as R, means the head. So Keter is, or Kether, depending on how we transliterate it and then how we pronounce it, because Hebrew has no vowels in the written language. It has markers to show us. And again, we're not doing a Hebrew language lesson here. We just need to learn it for the sake of our correspondences. So in the chart that I will give you, we will have K-T-H-R, Keter. And for example, let's take a look at Hod, that is actually Hey Val Daleth. So again, we have a number of Hebrew letters for each of these 10 names. Now, what your exercise is in this first exercise, which is an ongoing one, so start with wherever you need to start it, would like to start it, as long as over time you build it up. I want you to know, you're going to need to know 22 things. You're going to have to learn 22 things. And that is basically the Hebrew letter and the correspondence to the tarot, major arcana. So now we're going to introduce tarot into our mix, because it is fundamental to the WEIS as a language. This is why I teach tarot. This is why I've spent so much time promulgating a particular approach to tarot called tarosophy. It is so that I had a language out there that can then be used to shortcut people into the Weiss. And that has been the plan all along for the last 15 or 20 years, so that we can build up a language base in the audience or potential audience for people who wanted to study further, and allow that to become familiar to people so that it acted as a foundation for the Weiss itself. So we have 22 things to learn, and then I'm going to give you an exercise to do once you've learned those. So there's a learning exercise, and then there is an application exercise. And then in our second lesson, we're going to start to look at a meditation or a praxis, a practical piece of work. So basically we have the 3 levels of learning. We have knowledge, we have theory, and then we have praxis, or theoria and praxis, and intelligence, I guess, for the 3 sort of levels that we're learning. So I'm just going to switch our presentation down here so I can show you what we're going to learn. Okay, so here we have our 2 sheets that you're going to be provided with in the first lesson. And again, there's a bit of extra information on these for later work, but for now you're going to learn 2 things basically. In effect, it's sort of 32 things, but it's broken into 2 things. The very first thing is I'd like you to learn the names of the Sephiroth. So these are this column here. I'd expect you to be able to know Kether, Hokmah, Bina, Darth, Hased, Geborah, Tifreth, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth. If you'd like to learn them numerically, 1, 2, 3, skip Darth, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because Darth is not really a Sephiroth in the same way that the others are, but we're going to include that in the list. You'll notice it's not on the diagram here. So the 10 Sephiroth and the non-Sephiroth of Darth, it's best to learn them all together. So the first thing I want you to do is learn those 10 names, those 10 things. If it's easier just to repeat them, it's easier to repeat them as a bit of a sort of poem. If it's easier to learn them as they appear on the Tree of Life, then that is all fine. But I'd expect you to be able to recite offhand Kether, Hokmah, Bina, Darth, Hased, Geborah, Tifreth, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth. If you find better ways of pronouncing them online, then that is fine, but that's the way I tend to pronounce them. You can learn them on a blank Tree of Life and just keep writing them. Kether, Hokmah, Bina, Hased, Geborah, Tifreth, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malkuth. Or you can learn them from the ground up. Malkuth, Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tifreth, Geborah, Hased, Bina, Hokmah, Kether, going back up the other way. However you want to do it, that's up to your learning preference, but you need to learn the 10 names of the Sephiroth, and this is Sephira singular, Sephiroth plural, numerical emanations or positions, stations on the Tree of Life. Okay, so that's the very first thing you need to learn. Just note this table here, this column here, we're going to come back to that for your exercise. If you also want to learn at the same time the English translation, the most common way of translating it is the one given in bold here. So Kether, the crown, Hokmah, wisdom, Bina, understanding, Darth, knowledge, Hased, mercy, or loving kindness, Geborah, strength, Tifreth, beauty, Netzach, victory, Hod, glory, Yesod, foundation, Malkuth, kingdom, as we mentioned before. So if you're going to learn those together, learn the word in bold and the name, the Hebrew word, its English transliteration at the same time. So that's 2 things times 11, that's 22 things to learn there. Okay? And we're not going to worry about the Hebrew language at the moment, drawing these as Hebrew characters. I just want you to be able to learn something fairly straightforward, relatively speaking, in English first, before we then go back into its Hebrew roots and the use of that and the necessity of writing divine names and all of those things. I want you to have the foundation first, okay? And then what you're going to need to do is the more long-term piece of learning, which is the Hebrew letters, and you need to learn those again. I'd prefer you to learn it just in English. Aleph, Beth, Gimel, Daleth, Hey, Vav, Zain, Heth, Teth, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Pei, Sadai, Kof, Resh, Shin, Tau. So you need to be able to learn those and recognize what English character they tend to get transliterated as. So an Aleph is usually represented as an A, Beth as a B, Gimel as a G, Daleth as a D, Hey as a Hey. They tend to make sense. Vav as a Vav, V, Zain as a Z, Heth as a Ch sound, as in loch in Scottish, Teth as a T, not to be confused with Tau, which is a th sound, as in Sephiroth, a plural sound at the end, a th. Same with Samek S and Shin Sh, Resh R, Kof Q, or sometimes K, which is where we get the variant spellings of Kabbalah, because that's spelled with a Kof, which can be transliterated as a K sound or a K sound, a K sound, or even a hard C sound, K. So you get Kabbalah, Kabbalah, and Quabala, because it's spelt with a Kof, and that gets transliterated into different letters. Sadai, which is a S sound, TZ, Pei, a F sound, PH, Ayin as a glottal sound of a camel swallowing or coughing. It's usually pronounced as a sound, A apostrophe A. It's transliterated as Samek S, Nun, N, and so on, going back up. Yod is sometimes a Y or an I. But it's important to learn those and recognize those for the exercise. And that's why I've given you the particular exercise to test your learning and to practice it as well. So what you need to learn on this sheet is the letter, but if it's helpful, well, not if it's helpful, because it is helpful and it's essential for correspondence. We're learning our first tarot correspondence here by learning that Aleph corresponds to the Fool card. So these are the 22 major arcana, and these are the 22 Hebrew letters, and there are 22 of each, hence all of the history about the fact that they are secret correspondences to the Kabbalah and so forth. It may just be a wonderful synchronicity, but I believe myself that it's because everything arises in the same universe, the same way we relate to the universe. So when we come up with a model of the universe or a language for it, whether it's pictorial or phonetic as part of a cultural language, then we'll tend to do it in sets of 22 or thereabouts. It's just the way we relate to the world. And then, therefore we get correspondences, which explains why correspondence is so important, because it is all models of our relationship to reality and our experience of that arising relationship, which is in effect truth, or the manifestation exemplar of truth in the universe. So pretty deep stuff, the heights of spirituality and mysticism, but it starts at the beginning. As at the beginning, so at the end. As within, so without. As then, so now, and always. So we learn these correspondences, and you need to learn those, or at least have them as a reference. Okay, so that's what you need to learn. You need to learn the pronunciation of these Hebrew letters, their transliteration, and their corresponding tarot card, and you need to learn the names of the Sephiroth. Now, as you learn those, or when you've learned those, depending on how you want to do it, you can even do it in order to learn them, because I like exercises that can do any of those things so that it's more adaptable to your learning style. You remember this column here where we have the Hebrew transliteration of the spelling of each of these names of the Sephiroth. So the Sephira Tifereth is spelled Tau, Pei, Aleph, Resh, Tau. So it's got a Tau at the start and a Tau at the end, and we, interestingly enough, pronounce that Tifereth because it's a hard T at the beginning and a soft Th at the end, even though it's a TH. And you'll know from your other chart that that is then TH is Tau, PH is Pei, A is Aleph, and R is Resh, and the last TH again is another Tau at the end. So we know that this Tifereth, the name of that Sephira, is spelled Tau, Pei, Aleph, Resh, and Tau. Okay, so that is your theoretical application of your learnt knowledge. The fact that we can now transliterate and see that each of those names, the 10 names, 11 names that you have learnt, is spelt in Hebrew, transliterated into English, and now theoretically we can now see that each of those letters is the Hebrew letter that relates to its transliteration. Kaf, Tau, Resh, Keter or Kether is Kaf, Tau, and Resh, and that's transliterated as K, TH, and R for Kaf, Tau, and Resh. Make sense? So we are now applying our rote learning of these things, and now we're theoretically applying them. We can now do something with that. Now, your practical exercise is to use correspondence, and this is a unique exercise. You won't see this anywhere else unless it's been lifted from the magician's Kabbalah or Teosophy, is this. What you can now do as or when you've learnt these correspondences, and if you've already done this through one of our other books, then that's fine. But for this series, I'd like you to start making a new journal or a new diary or a new online blank Word document or Notepad document, however you want to do it, to record this exercise, because this is your actual exercise for class 1 of this series. What I'd like you to do is now you'll be able to use the correspondences. So this column here that you've been learning, the correspondence of the Hebrew letters to the 22 tarot cards, the 22 letters to the 22 major arcana. What you can now do is this. You can take, and what I'd ask you to do for your exercise is you can take the Hebrew name here, Kether, Kaf, Tau, Resh, and through correspondence, looking at this table, you can now see that Kaf, your K, corresponds to the wheel. So I want you to write down Kether, Kaf, Tau, Resh, KTHR, corresponds to the wheel, and then the Tau corresponds to the universe, and the resh corresponds to what? Just look it up on the table, and you can see that it corresponds down here to the sun, So Kaf, wheel, Tau, universe, resh, sun. So you can now write down Kether, Kaf, Tau, resh corresponds to wheel, universe, sun. Can you see what we can now do? We can now illustrate this word through its correspondence by the tarot. And this is your first fundamental lesson in the WEIS, in the Western Esoteric Initiatory System as I teach it. We can now use our tarot background and our knowledge of the tarot cards to consider how those tarot cards relate to Kether. Now, Kether is the crown. So what I want you to do is go through these 11 names. There are 10 Sephiroth, not 11, or 9, as the Kabbalistic texts constantly tell us. But Darth we include because it's a necessary thing which we'll come on to later. So these 11 names you should be able to, and if you've learnt the correspondences to the tarot correspondences, you know the transliterations off by heart, which I would ask you to do, and you know the names of the Sephiroth, and you know their transliteration, in your head you should be able to say Hanged Man, Justice, Wheel. No, won't do the others because that's your homework. So you should be able to do this in your head through correspondence. And also, when you're doing tarot readings, think about the corresponding Hebrew letter. So if the wheel turns up in a reading, you should know that that is Kaf, K. And that's all you need to know at the moment. But you can now apply that. Your exercise is to use correspondence to analyze, to illustrate these 10 words. So Kether, meaning crown, is illustrated by the wheel, the world, and the sun. We can then look at that and discuss it, but that is your basic exercise, is to learn, do, understand the concept, and then apply the concept of correspondence in a practical manner for further understanding and for an application of the actual teaching, if that makes sense. That we can now see Kether on the top of the tree of life through correspondence is actually, and always has been and always will be, the wheel, the world, and the sun. In effect, unity, the universe and light. If we take some correspondences, then interpretations of those tarot cards, the wheel is also about karma and fate. So that is right at the source, and Kether is the point from which everything revolves and evolves like the wheel. And we have the ups and downs of life, but at the center, the hub is always still. The world is everything, all things, the way we perceive the world. It is the dance of the 72 sacred names. It is all sorts of things, but it is embedded in the very source of the universe itself, the very first point of the universe. And then R, corresponding to Resh, corresponding to the sun, we interpret as things like light and the naked spirit and the truth and things like that, the burning truth of all creation, or the cosmic fire that started the universe. Kaf, the wheel, we also correspond, for example, to time. So we have time, space, and energy all bound up in the word Kether, through correspondence, through tarot. Isn't that incredible? We can now illustrate and expand and consider. And of course, when you've done this to all of these, you can start to consider it as a massive illustration of a map of the entire universe and everything that happens in it, which is exactly what the tarot purports to be. So through correspondence, as Eliphas Levi said, if we were stuck in a prison cell and only had a tarot deck, we could work out everything about the universe that we ever needed to know from that deck of cards itself. And this is how we do it, through the magic, through the secret, through the occult experience of correspondence. Because the more you learn this, the more you apply it, the more you will start to see it manifest itself in your tarot card readings. Suddenly your tarot card readings will be representing, particularly the major arcana, as we've learned in this first exercise. It will start to unlock, as it does with the character of Louise in Arrival, Times of Our Life by Ted Chiang, a fundamental rejigging of your experiential understanding of the universe. You will start to, I assure you, from experience and from teaching this for 45 years and learning it for 45 years, an experience that will change the way you actually perceive the universe. And you can test that. You can actually experiment with this, practice it, and start to observe how you suddenly start to see things in terms of underlining occult truths, patterns, fundamental rearrangements of the tree of life, of the tarot cards, and start to see those through correspondence as mere resonances of these fundamental patterns. And you can then start to, over time, use those patterns in order to influence the way you relate to reality itself. And I assure you, and again, I'm going to propose to you at this stage of your studies, your very first step, that over time, this will have far more structured, resonant, consistent, comprehensive, congruent magical experiences in your life and the life of those around you, far more than invoking Belial or trying some magical square from an ancient grimoire, or spending your life studying the mysteries of the PGM or the Crooked Path or anything else. As I think it's an old country and western song or something that says, there are many people who want to fly to heaven, but very few are prepared for the climb. And this is what I want to teach you, is the steps on the climb to the divine. That is why this course is called what it is. It actually means upwards, to ascend, to rise to the divine. And that really is at the heart of our journey in the Weiss. So thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to seeing your work on this and discussing it. And again, thank you for being a member, a magician, an actual magician, by supporting the channel. It's very much appreciated. Of course, this leads into later work. I'm deliberately doing this as a foundation for the Crucible Club and for the Order of Everlasting Day. Copies of each of these lessons will be available to actual members of the Order of Everlasting Day, so that they are backfilled with some of the foundational work that they will already know, of course, but this particular medium of delivering them. So again, thank you. Your work is to learn the English version of the Hebrew 22 characters, their transliteration, their correspondence to the 22 tarot cards, the names of the 10 Sephiroth and the one non-Sephiroth, Darth, and then apply your knowledge of correspondences to the Hebrew transliterations so that you can get an illustration of the nature of all of these Sephiroth on the Tree of Life through Kabbalah. Again, a unique exercise, but one that I feel is important and will set you up as a foundation for applying the academic understanding of correspondence and preparing you for later works with actual magic. So thank you again for supporting the Actual Magician's bookshelf, and I look forward to delivering your next lessons in this particular series. Until next time, as ever, the worker is hidden in the workshop.